This time we're gonna build an impossibly thin concrete lounger, only 3/4 of an inch thick with no rebar. Why so thin? Well, because the shape is inspired by the thin, streamlined piece of furniture that first sparked my interest in design way back when I was in high school, the Corbusier LC4. You see, when I was a teenager, I walked into a Sharper Image store and saw this chair. It was the first piece of furniture I'd ever fallen in love with. Now I'm gonna be making an outdoor lounger inspired by the shape out of concrete, and the first thing that we gotta do is figure out dimensions. So we're just gonna bust out a tape measure and see where these curves are that fit the body so perfectly.
She's curvy and she owns it. I like that.
16.5 inches by 18.5, 32. Also got to grab the angles, about 130, 122. You know, I would have thought they were like 30, 60, 90s, but it is what it is. So we got our measurements. I'm gonna head to the computer and get to designing. I think I have a design here. I'm gonna have like a curved concrete shape here and kind of have it recessed in like a circular wood base. And I'm thinking it'd be really cool if the base could somehow spin and rotate. That's gonna be one major challenge. I don't think your average lazy Susan hardware is gonna work for that. Second challenge is just gonna be getting this concrete shape. And I wanna make a form that's reusable because I could see this actually being a product that I sell. All right, let's get down to the shop and start working on the concrete form for this. I'm building this form to cast the concrete upside down. And the first step is using my CNC to cut out these inner supports for the form from MDF. Got all the pieces cut for what we'll call the skeleton of the form. Got a bunch of cross braces. We have 3 pieces that are supporting it. Now we just gotta assemble this form. With that support structure assembled, it's time to make the curvy base for the concrete form. And I wanted to try something different and see if I could save a little bit of money by using plywood underlayment on the base, because it does flex quite a bit. And then I'll be topping that with a fiberglass enforced PVC wall panel, which will give us the waterproof layer we need to cast concrete against. And both these materials can be easily ripped down to size on the table saw. And to improve the odds, I sprayed down the underlayment with water just to make it flex a bit more, but well, oh God. Thought I had enough flex in this, but apparently not.
No flex, zone.
I think I'm gonna have to suck it up. This is a $12 sheet. I'll have to go buy some bendy ply, which is quite a bit more expensive. It is what it is.
I want to 60 something.
Okay, I will be out in a little bit to grab it. We'll be back once we have that. Got the bendy ply, so gonna rip this down the plywood and be back on track making the form. All right, the base of bendy ply is in. And for those of you that don't know, bendy ply, it's basically just taking plywood and making the grain of the wood run all the same direction. Normally plywood has grain running this way and alternates 90 degrees, and that gives it a lot of strength and makes it rigid. This one, all the layers of wood in this plywood run the same direction, which means it's bendable along this direction, 90 degrees to the grain, but not along this direction, running with the grain. We don't want too much flex because when we put the concrete in, we don't want to have bumps in it. So we can't have screws or nails or showing through the top of this. We need it to be smooth. So we're gonna use contact cement to put this on the form. This stuff bonds instantly, so it is a little bit nerve-wracking. You apply this stuff to both pieces of material, then you kind of use little pieces of wood or dowels or whatever to separate the two pieces so it doesn't touch, because it's like instantly bonding. So if it touches and bonds out of alignment, you're kind of screwed. I want to be able to reuse this form. So I'm going to cover the edges of these melamine sides with a little bit of melamine edge banding. That'll waterproof those so that when we're doing the concrete, it doesn't get in there. Hopefully when we pop the sides off, it'll all come clean and we'll be able to use the sides again as well. We'll see how it goes. I just realized this little fast cap roller thing I have for putting on edge banding, totally like a little skateboard with this thing being a ramp. The form is assembled, and to be honest, this thing is probably the prettiest form I've ever made with edge banding and everything. It's almost a shame that we're gonna have to put concrete in that thing, but you know, gotta do what we gotta do. Before we do the do, it's time for another episode of
Caulk Talk, which is the same as every episode of Caulk Talk. I apply a layer of paste wax to the melamine, lay down a generous layer of 100% silicone caulk, run a metal fondant ball tool over all the caulk lines. Metal fondant ball tool pushes excess caulk to the sides, leaves a clean line over the seam, and the layer of paste wax makes it easy to peel the excess caulk away once it cures, leaving a perfect caulk line. And that's it for this episode of Caulk Talk.
Before going further, we gotta gear up with this video's amazing sponsor, Venom Steel. Venom Steel makes high quality gloves and protective apparel like this. First thing I want to talk to you about is their heavy duty disposable nitrile gloves. These gloves are 6 mil thick, that's 70% thicker than your standard disposable glove. And on the rare occasion where a rip does occur, their 2-layer structure helps prevent your skin from being exposed. When the black outer layer rips, you see that inner white layer peeking through, and that lets you know it's time to change gloves before your skin is exposed. One other problem I've had with disposable gloves is that they just don't fit well and are hard to work in. I end up getting frustrated and just taking them off. Not so with the Venom Steel gloves. They fit well, don't hinder my dexterity, and you can even use touchscreen devices with them on. That means that I can wear them all day and be properly protected, because gloves are no good if you don't have them on. Beyond gloves, Venom Steel has products to protect you head to toe. Coveralls, face masks, boot covers, and more. We all need disposable gloves, whether it's for working with concrete, pouring epoxy, applying wood finish, and so on. If you fall in that category, I highly recommend checking out Venom Steel next time you're buying protective gear. You can check them out at venomsteel.com or via the link in the description below. You can also just pick them up at your local Lowe's, Menards, or Walmart, and I guarantee you'll notice the difference in quality. And of course, when you support a brand that supports the channel, you're also supporting the channel, so thanks in advance for that. And thanks to Venom Steel for sponsoring this video. And now, let's get back to it. All right, it's concrete time. Always a little nerve-wracking, also a little exciting. We're gonna be spraying the face coat in, then putting in the back coat with glass fibers. This is only gonna be about 3/4 of an inch thick, and I know there's gonna be people banging on their keyboards saying there's no way that's gonna last without a bunch of rebar, it's gonna break, fall apart. Well, about 5 years ago, I did a similar curved project sitting in Chris Salamoni's backyard. Been there 5 years, been outdoors in the elements for that long, so I think we're gonna be fine. And on that note, I gotta get all the ingredients measured out, and then we'll start spraying.
Since this lounger is only 3/4 of an inch thick, we can't just use any old concrete. We're gonna be using a specialized mix from Fishtone, which will be reinforced with glass fibers. I then spray a thin layer of the mix onto the form. The glass fibers that we'll add later don't look good if they're exposed, and this thin face coat will hide them, giving us a really nice smooth surface.
So one thing we're gonna do, instead of just using glass fibers, is we got this alkali resistant glass fiber mesh or scrim. So we're gonna cut this down and just lay a sheet of this into the form when we do the back coat, just to give it a nice continuous reinforcement, and it should make it nice and strong.
With the mesh cut to size, we set it aside and got to work mixing up the back coat, which is the same HP50 mix as we used in the face coat, but with alkali resistant glass fibers added to it. So while we're hand packing the back coat in, let me talk about why this mix is so much stronger than your cheap big box store concrete. First up, you've obviously got the glass fibers as reinforcement. And something as thin as we're doing, putting thick rebar in it would actually make it weaker instead of stronger. So in this scenario, glass fibers are a superior reinforcement. But there's a lot to it beyond just the glass fibers. The mix also uses a plasticizer, which essentially makes the mix more fluid with less water, so you can have a higher concentration of Portland cement, more than double the amount of cement for the same volume compared to cheap mixes. There's also an acrylic polymer in the mix. You can kind of think of the polymer as something that fills the space between the cement molecules and the concrete with a plastic instead of air like you'd have in a typical mix. This means glass fiber reinforced concrete is much more dense and can actually flex a little bit. It isn't brittle like typical concrete. All these things result in a really, really strong concrete. And I know there'll be some haters out there that don't believe me, but it's going to be plenty strong at 3/4 of an inch thick. And if you're at the other end of the spectrum wondering why 3/4 of an inch is such a big deal, if you were to make something like this out of a standard big box store mix, you'd probably be looking at 1.5 to 2 inches thick at least in order to make it structurally sound.
All right, it is 3 days later. Hopefully it is nice and hard.
That's what she said?
We're just gonna grind down any imperfections on the edges there and then pop this sucker out. Oop, we got a little crackage in the corner we're gonna have to repair. Something happened there. There we go. Broke the seal. All right. That is pretty cool.
Fall off. Okay.
Are you filming?
Yeah.
All right, if I fall, let's see how it fits. Oh, if it breaks. Oh yeah, that's not a bad fit. That's nice. That's a nice ergonomic seat there. Oh, good. It's tipping back. It's pretty decently balanced, though. I got to give it to old Corbusier. You want to try it?
No.
All right, we got the lounger all sanded nicely, and now time to mix up the sealer, and this is where the concrete really comes alive. So excited to see that go on. So next up, we got to figure out the base for this, and I've got a couple ideas here. First up, we got the circular base, but finding heavy duty rotating hardware for this wide of a base might be tricky, because if someone steps on the edge of this base here, the whole thing could tip over if you don't have big enough rotating hardware. Second option, switching to a narrower lip shape. Well, I think it actually looks better. It just looks more proportional. You'll still have a little surface here where you could put a drink, but because the base is narrower, we can use some hardware that is about $200 or $300 less, just because it's smaller for the rotating base. So I think we're gonna go with the ellipse shape. And I want this to get outside, so I think we'll need some sort of dimensional 4x4 lumber. Let's just head to the lumber yard and figure it out. Thinking cedar, but cedar has been pretty darn expensive recently. Maybe we'll find something cheaper. We do want it to look good though. So we've got all the treated lumber here. I don't like this because I actually want to run the pieces through the planers. Heading into this warehouse, see what cedar looks like in here. Okay, we're up on the balcony now, and we've got more S4S 4x4x10 cedar. And right now, it looks like there's a sale on the stuff that's S4S. So no reason not to get that. It's actually less expensive than rough sawn. I think we're just gonna grab that. It's like $35 board. We need like 4 10-footers, so not too bad. We've got a drive-through here. Pick this up.
Back in the workshop, I cut the 4x4s to length, and then it was a pretty simple glue up.
All kosher.
I ran the boards on the jointer and then through the planer to get 2 sides that were even.
Wish you guys could be here, but the smell of some fresh cut cedar, pretty darn hard to beat. Gonna lay these out. So now we're just gonna get these laid out how we want them, with alternating grains on the end. Then we're gonna glue these bad boys right on up.
Then I busted out my favorite parallel clamps from channel sponsor Rockler Woodworking to get everything glued up. Also got to give a shout out to Rockler's little comb tooth spreader for spreading the glue. It's one of those little things that didn't cost much, but I use it all the time and just absolutely love it. I'll leave a link to the spreader and all the Rockler products I use in this build down in the video description. Once the glue had dried, I moved the panel onto the CNC to carve out a dip in the wood that will allow us to recess the concrete lounger into the wood base. Now here I was a little bit nervous because this was my first time ever doing a 3D carve into wood.
Oh man, that is nice. Like, almost don't even need to sand that. I am relieved that came out okay. It's actually the first time I've ever 3D carved wood. I've done foam before, never wood. Now we just gotta cut out the ellipse right around it. Hopefully, if all my calculations were right, then the divot in the middle will be right in the middle of the ellipse, so.
Now I don't currently have a CNC bit that will cut all the way through that 3.5-inch base. So that means we're gonna have to use human controlled tools to finish cutting out the ellipse. I started by using a jigsaw to cut off the excess, staying just proud of the line cut by the CNC. Then I busted out a templating bit to cut everything flush as far down as that bit would reach, but I realized it wouldn't reach all the way. So the last step was to move it over to the router table and use a flush trim bit to cut the remainder off. This bit is super scary and I never get used to using it. And this time, unfortunately, some of those fears came true.
Well, we got an issue. I really hope we don't have to throw this out and start over. Basically, got a big chunk here that just came out. I think we're gonna be able to glue it back in. So I'm gonna try to get some wood glue underneath this, clamp it, and hopefully once it's clamped on that crack, it'll disappear and then cut it. So this is the part that was blown out. On the top, can't even really tell. So little divot here, but once we sand down a little bit more, that will go away. But other than that, I mean, that whole section, can't even see the spot here or here where we reattach that chunk. it fits. It's in a little recessed nook, and it's pretty stable. However, I think we're gonna build some little supports in the middle, which really won't change the aesthetic. We can just put these blocks next to the lounger and draw the angle we need to cut. Then we can head over to the bandsaw, cut out the angle we've drawn, and hopefully that'll do a pretty good job of supporting these fully without changing the aesthetic. Just had a thought that because this is going to be an outdoor lounger, we don't want rain accumulating in the little pocket down here underneath the concrete. So at the edges here, maybe in the middle, I'm going to drill a few drainage holes. You won't see them because they'll be under the concrete, but hopefully that'll prevent rain from accumulating in this well.
With that done, it was time for finishing and assembly. For the finish, I'm just going with 5 coats of Halcyon Clear varnish because it's super easy to apply and also has great UV resistance since this is going to be outdoors. Now, as we're assembling the finished product, I'm thinking back to the design that this was inspired by and realized that inspiration can take different forms. Sometimes what you produce at the end looks somewhat similar with minor differences from the original. In this case, I think that it actually looks quite a bit different than the original, but because of the shape and the dimensions, it's definitely a nod to that famous Corbusier LC4 that first sparked my interest in furniture design. Now, one thing the Corbusier didn't do was spin. And to do that, I picked up heavy-duty Lazy Susan hardware, again from Rockler Woodworking. This swivel hardware is rated for up to 660 pounds, and its 24-inch width will fit the 30-inch base perfectly. I was super nervous about the hardware working, but this actually ended up being one of the easiest parts of the build. It took about 15 minutes, and the spinning action is super smooth.
All right. That'll do. All right, so we just got upstairs, just brought the base up, and we're just thinking, we need to make one change. This thing needs some LEDs. So we're gonna flip it over, throw some undermount LEDs on that base, give it a cool floating effect. Test and see. Oh yeah, that's gonna be cool. Before we get to all the close-up beauty shots, I wanna talk about some of the mistakes and things I do differently. So those little chips in the corner, I sort of repaired them, but at the end of the day, I decided that this one is gonna be just a prototype, so I didn't want to spend a bunch of time and energy on that. And the mistakes that led to the corners popping out, well, they're pretty easy fixes, but they happened way earlier in the process. So there are 2 things that I needed to do when I was building the form. The first one was cut that plastic sheet wider. When you adhere that plastic sheet with the contact cement, it's instant bond. That means you have to have it aligned perfectly straight over those hills right from the get-go. Now, I anticipated it would be tough to line up, so I think I gave myself about an inch and a half extra, but that just wasn't enough extra material to allow for the plastic being off-center somewhat. And as a result of not having enough extra material, trying to get it aligned straight, there were some air bubbles that got introduced between the plywood and that plastic layer. Those gave out under the weight of the concrete, caused the cracking. There you go. Second thing I could have done at the corners was put some spray foam or something solid into those ends where it was unsupported. And if I'd done that, the side blowouts would have been no issue. But I think we've got a good proof of concept with this. We've got some pictures. We'll put it on the web store I'm launching later this year. And if we get orders for something like this, well, then we know how to fix the problems when we build it for a customer. Second thing, I know we're gonna get questions whether it's comfortable or not. Well, all I can say is you'd be surprised. Chances are I'm gonna put it somewhere where we could put an umbrella or something over it if you want to stay a little bit cooler. And with that, let's cue the final beauty shots. As always, I want to thank you guys for coming by, watching the video, supporting the channel. It really means the world to me. And if you think I've earned it, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button. We're closing in on 1 million subs, and that would just be an amazing milestone to hit this year. That's it for this time, and I'll see you guys next time.